Sarah felt like a character in a movie where the scenery never changed. Same job, same coffee shop, same friendly chats with her dad next door. Even her art projects felt stuck. She made pretty things, but nothing that truly sparked joy lately. She was 32, and life felt like a gentle hum instead of a catchy song. Her dad, bless his heart, was her best friend. They had Sunday dinners, watched old movies, and he always had a goofy joke ready. He lived right next door, ever since Mom passed away 5 years ago. It was comforting, but sometimes Sarah wished for a little more adventure. Then, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a delivery. It wasn't her dad. It was a man she vaguely remembered from childhood barbecues, Frank. Dad's old army buddy. He looked good. Really good for 63. Still strong, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Sarah, right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Your dad mentioned you're quite the handywoman. I'm in a bit of a bind and was hoping you could help." He explained he needed to put up a bird feeder, but his drill was on the fritz. He needed to borrow one, just for a bit. "Of course, Frank," Sarah said, trying to sound casual. "The garage is right here. Dad keeps most of his tools there, but I've got a few of my own too." She led him around the side of the house, the scent of roses from her garden filling the air. Frank chuckled. "Your dad always was a tool man. Though, last I heard, he was more interested in fishing than fixing things." "He still fishes," Sarah smiled. "But he likes having projects, even if they just involve rearranging his tackle box." The garage door groaned as she lifted it. It was a typical garage, a little messy, a lot useful. Her dad's workbench was covered in half-finished birdhouses and old car parts. Her corner held canvases, paintbrushes, and a slightly chaotic collection of sculpting clay. It was a shared space, a blend of their lives. "Wow, this is quite the setup," Frank said, looking around with genuine interest. "Looks like you're quite the artist." "I dabble," Sarah said, feeling a little self-conscious. "But right now, a drill is what we need." The garage smelled of sawdust, old paint, and possibility. Sunlight streamed in through the dusty windows, illuminating the organized chaos. Sarah knew this space like the back of her hand. Every tool had its place, even if it didn't always look that way. "Dad probably has 3 drills," she said, already scanning the shelves. "The question is, which one is actually working?" She rummaged through a toolbox overflowing with screwdrivers and wrenches. "He's got a habit of buying new ones instead of fixing the old ones." Frank leaned against the workbench, watching her. "Sounds like a familiar habit." He smiled, and Sarah felt a little flutter in her stomach. It had been a long time since she felt noticed. "Uh-huh," she exclaimed, pulling out a bright orange drill. "This one looks promising. Barely used, probably still has a full charge." She tested the trigger, and the drill whirred to life. "Yep, this should do the trick." She turned to hand it to Frank, a little too quickly. The drill slipped slightly in her grasp. Frank reached out quickly, his hand covering hers on the drill. "Careful there," he said, his fingers warm and strong. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was just a reflex, a simple act of helping, but it felt like so much more. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. He wasn't looking at the drill, he was looking at her. "Thanks," she managed to say, her voice a little breathy. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. It wasn't just the warm garage, it was him. She straightened up, holding the drill a little more securely now. She pretended to adjust her glasses, giving herself a moment to compose herself. "So," she said, a little too brightly, "bird feeder, huh? Dad loves bird feeders. Says they keep him entertained for hours." She bent down slightly to pick up a stray screwdriver from the floor, stalling for time. Her jeans were a little tight, and she felt a pang of self-consciousness. "Old bones," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to Frank. But he heard her. "You don't have any old bones, Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "You look great." Her gaze flickered back to his, surprised by his words. The compliment, delivered with such sincerity, made her blush deepen. She cleared her throat, trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "So, the bird feeder," she repeated, handing him the drill again. This time, she made sure her grip was firm. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down her spine. He took the drill, his eyes still locked on hers. The air crackled with unspoken words, a silent question hanging between them. "It's just a simple little thing," he said, finally breaking the gaze. He turned the drill over in his hands, examining it. "But your dad's been wanting one for ages. Says the squirrels are eating all his sunflower seeds." Sarah leaned back against the workbench, her arms crossed. She watched him, really watched him. The way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his hands moved with a quiet confidence. He was older, yes, but there was a vitality about him, a spark that she found incredibly appealing. "He'll be thrilled," she said, her voice softer now. "He's been complaining about those squirrels for weeks." The sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air, illuminating the space between them. It was as if time had slowed, focusing everything on the simple act of handing over the drill. Their fingers brushed, a light, almost accidental contact. But then Sarah held on, just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Her fingertips lingered on the back of his hand, feeling the rough texture of his skin, the warmth that radiated from him. It wasn't a strong grip, more like a gentle exploration. A question asked without words. He didn't pull away. His hand remained still, allowing the connection to linger. In that moment, Sarah felt a jolt of something she hadn't felt in years, pure, unadulterated attraction. It wasn't just physical, it was a sense of recognition, of understanding, as if she'd known him for a lifetime. She looked up at him again, her eyes searching his. What was he thinking? Was he feeling it too? The spark, the awareness, the undeniable pull that seemed to defy logic and age. His expression was unreadable, a careful mask that hid his thoughts. But in the depths of his eyes, she saw a flicker of something. Interest? Curiosity? Maybe even a hint of reciprocation. It was enough to make her heart race. Finally, slowly, she released her grip. But the electricity remained, hanging heavy in the air. A beat of silence stretched between them, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the distant chirping of birds. Sarah, suddenly feeling exposed, took a small step back, her heel bumping against the edge of the workbench. She hadn't planned that. It wasn't a deliberate move, but it served its purpose, breaking the intense eye contact. She glanced down at the cluttered surface, paintbrushes stiff with dried paint, a half-finished clay sculpture, a tangle of wires. Evidence of her creative life, her solitary world. She looked back up at Frank, a nervous smile playing on her lips. It was a small, hesitant smile, unsure of itself. But it was there, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Frank's gaze softened. He seemed to understand her unease, her sudden vulnerability. He didn't push, didn't say anything that would make her feel more uncomfortable. He simply met her smile with one of his own, a warm, reassuring smile that eased her anxiety. "Well," he said, his voice low and gentle, "I should probably get this bird feeder up before your dad sicks those squirrels on me." He chuckled, a sound that filled the garage with a sense of warmth and familiarity. He carefully set the drill down on the workbench, a deliberate act that avoided any further accidental touches. "Do you have a ladder I could borrow?" "Ladder's in the back," Sarah said, gesturing towards a dark corner of the garage. She took another small step back, her hips brushing against the workbench this time. It was definitely an accident. Or was it? She wasn't entirely sure anymore. The smile was still there, playing on her lips like a secret. It wasn't a wide, beaming smile, but a subtle curve, a hint of amusement and maybe, just maybe, a touch of flirtation. She couldn't help it. She was enjoying this unexpected connection, this little dance of attraction. As she turned to lead Frank to the ladder, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a dusty mirror hanging on the wall. She looked different. Her eyes were brighter, her cheeks flushed. She looked alive, awakened from a long slumber. "Careful back there," Frank called out, his voice slightly muffled. "It's a bit of a jungle." Sarah chuckled. "Tell me about it. Dad's been meaning to organize this place for years." She navigated through a maze of old tires, garden tools, and forgotten treasures, the smile never leaving her face. It felt good to smile, to feel this lightness in her chest. She found the ladder leaning against the back wall, covered in cobwebs. "Here you go," she said, turning back to Frank. "One slightly dusty ladder, ready for action." Frank mirrored her smile, a genuine, warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He didn't step closer, but his gaze lingered on her, taking in the flushed cheeks and the bright sparkle in her eyes. "Slightly dusty is an understatement," he said, his voice laced with amusement. He reached out and gently brushed a cobweb from her hair. "But I appreciate it." The simple gesture sent another shiver down her spine. It was so casual, so innocent, yet it felt incredibly intimate. Like he was claiming her, just a little bit. "So," he continued, his gaze still locked on hers, "since I'm borrowing your dad's drill and your ladder, how about I treat you to lunch after I get this bird feeder up? As a thank you." It wasn't exactly unexpected, but it was perfect. A casual invitation, a simple offer of friendship, with the unspoken possibility of something more hanging in the air. Sarah's smile widened, becoming a little more genuine, a little less nervous. "I'd like that very much," she said, her voice soft. He picked up the ladder, his eyes never leaving hers. "Great," he said. "Lunch it is. Now let's tackle those squirrels." He turned and headed out of the garage, leaving Sarah standing there, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. The feeling of excitement was overwhelming. Sarah watched Frank disappear around the side of the house, the ladder bumping gently against his shoulder. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. This was crazy. Absolutely, wonderfully crazy. She wandered out of the garage and into the backyard, where she could see Frank setting up the ladder near the old oak tree. Her dad's favorite spot for birdwatching. "Need any help?" she called out, her voice a little shaky. Frank looked down from the ladder, his smile still in place. "Just admiring your dad's handiwork," he said, gesturing to the bird feeder. He always did have a knack for building things. Sarah walked closer, stopping a few feet from the ladder. "He built that one when I was little," she said, a fond smile gracing her lips. "I remember helping him paint it. I got more paint on myself than on the feeder." Frank chuckled. "Sounds like something he would let you do. He always was a softie when it came to you." "He still is," Sarah admitted, a warmth spreading through her chest. "He's the best dad a girl could ask for." There was a comfortable silence between them, a shared appreciation for her dad, but the underlying tension was still there, humming beneath the surface of their casual conversation. The memory of their lingering touch, the invitation to lunch, hung unspoken in the air. Frank carefully positioned the ladder against a sturdy branch, making sure it was secure before climbing up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the new bird feeder, a bright red contraption that was sure to attract the attention of every squirrel in the neighborhood. He measured the spot where he wanted to hang the feeder, marking it with a small pencil. Then, he reached for the drill. The familiar whirring sound filled the air as he expertly drilled a small hole into the branch. Sarah watched him, mesmerized. There was something incredibly attractive about a man who knew how to use his hands, who was capable and competent. The way his muscles flexed as he held the drill steady, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way he focused all his attention on the task at hand. His hands were strong, calloused, but also surprisingly graceful. She imagined those hands holding her, touching her. She quickly banished the thought from her mind, feeling a blush creep up her neck. She was getting ahead of herself. This was just lunch. A simple thank you. But even as she tried to convince herself of that, she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach, the undeniable pull that drew her to him. The sound of the drill stopped, and Frank looked down at her, a questioning look in his eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice slightly muffled by the distance. "Just admiring your skills," she replied, forcing a smile. "Everything looks great." He secured the bird feeder to the branch, stepping back to admire his work. "There," he said, climbing down the ladder. "Squirrel-proof, hopefully." He gathered the ladder and the drill, carrying them back towards the garage. Sarah followed, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment of truth. Back in the garage, Frank carefully placed the ladder against the wall, then turned to hand her the drill. Their eyes met, and the familiar spark ignited between them. He held the drill out, his fingers brushing against hers as she took it. This time, the contact was brief, but no less electric. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I really appreciate your help." It was just a simple thank you, but it felt like so much more. Like he was thanking her for more than just the drill, for more than just the ladder. Like he was thanking her for the connection they had shared, for the possibility of something new. "You're welcome, Frank," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. He lingered for a moment, his gaze searching hers. Then, with a slight smile, he turned and headed towards the door. "I'll see you at lunch," he said, and then he was gone. Sarah stood there for a long moment, the drill heavy in her hand. The garage suddenly felt empty, silent except for the buzzing of a fly trapped against the windowpane. Before he stepped out of the garage, Frank paused at the doorway. He turned back, his eyes meeting hers one last time. It was a lingering look, a silent question hanging in the air. A look that said, "Is this real? Are we really doing this?" Sarah held his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the answer was, but she knew she wanted to find out. She gave him a small, hopeful smile, a silent confirmation. He returned the smile, a hint of mischief in his eyes, and then he was gone, disappearing around the corner of the house. Sarah was left alone in the garage, surrounded by the familiar clutter of her dad's tools and her own art supplies. But the space felt different now, charged with a new energy, a new possibility. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The scent of sawdust and old paint was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, something sweet and intoxicating. The scent of adventure. The scent of Frank. She opened her eyes, a newfound determination in her gaze. Lunch was just a few hours away, and anything could happen. Sarah set the drill down on the workbench, her fingers tracing the spot where Frank's hand had been. She could still feel the warmth, the slight roughness of his skin. She closed her eyes again, replaying the moment in her mind. She opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the dusty mirror. Her cheeks were still flushed, her eyes still bright. She looked happy, truly happy, for the first time in a long time. What should she do next? Should she call her best friend, Lisa, and gush about the unexpected turn of events? Lisa would be thrilled for her, but also full of questions and warnings. Or should she call her dad? Tell him that Frank had stopped by, that he had put up the bird feeder? But how much should she reveal? Would he understand? Would he approve? The thought of her dad's reaction made her hesitate. He was a good man, but he could be a little overprotective, especially since her mom had passed away. The age difference alone would probably send him into a tailspin. No, she decided. She wouldn't call anyone. Not yet. She needed to process this herself, to figure out what she really wanted. She glanced at the clock. Only a few hours until lunch. Time to get ready. And maybe, just maybe, time to embrace the unexpected. She smiled, a thrill of anticipation coursing through her veins. The day was suddenly full of promise. She looked around the garage, really looked at it. It was the same space she had always known, the same slightly cluttered, slightly chaotic haven. But it felt different now. It felt alive. The sunlight streaming through the dusty windows seemed brighter, the scent of sawdust and old paint more appealing. Even her dad's half-finished birdhouses seemed to have a certain charm. She ran her hand over the smooth surface of the workbench, remembering the way Frank had leaned against it, his eyes watching her. She touched her art supplies, imagining him looking at her paintings, asking her about her sculptures. The garage, once just a storage space and a workshop, now felt like a place of possibility. A place where anything could happen. A place where she could be herself, explore her creativity, and maybe, just maybe, find love again. She picked up a paintbrush, its bristles stiff with dried paint. She had been feeling uninspired lately, her art projects stalled, her creativity dormant. But now she felt a spark, a renewed sense of purpose. She dipped the brush into a jar of water, swirling it around to soften the bristles. She didn't know what she would paint, what she would create, but she knew she wanted to create something. Something beautiful, something meaningful, something that reflected the newfound joy in her heart. She smiled, a sense of excitement bubbling up inside her. The garage was no longer just a garage. It was a sanctuary, a blank canvas, a place where she could start anew. And it was all thanks to Frank. But a nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. Was this real? Or was it just a fleeting moment, a temporary escape from her humdrum routine? Was she reading too much into a simple act of kindness, a casual invitation to lunch? The age difference loomed large in her thoughts. 31 years. It was a significant gap. What would people think? What would her dad think? And what did she really know about Frank? He was her dad's old army buddy, a familiar face from her childhood. But that was it. She didn't know his values, his beliefs, his hopes and dreams. She could dismiss it all, chalk it up to a harmless flirtation, a momentary lapse in judgment. She could go to lunch with him, be polite and friendly, and then gently let him know that she wasn't interested in anything more. Or she could take a leap of faith. She could embrace the uncertainty, the potential for heartbreak, and see where this unexpected connection might lead. She could allow herself to be vulnerable, to be open to the possibility of something new, something exciting, something real. It was a choice, a turning point. And the decision rested entirely on her shoulders. What would she do? Taking a deep breath, Sarah made her decision. She wouldn't let fear and doubt hold her back. She would go to lunch with Frank, and she would be open to whatever might happen. But a few hours felt like an eternity. She needed to hear his voice, to confirm that this wasn't all just a figment of her imagination. She grabbed her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. She didn't have his number. But then she remembered her dad had given her a list of contacts for emergencies, and Frank's number was on it. She dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest. What would she say? What if he thought she was crazy? He answered on the third ring. Hello. His voice was warm and familiar, sending a shiver down her spine. Hi, Frank, she said, trying to sound casual. It's Sarah. Sarah, he replied, his voice brightening. Everything all right? Yeah, everything's fine, she said, wincing at how lame that sounded. I was just wondering about the drill. Did it have all the right attachments? I know Dad has a million different bits and pieces. It was a ridiculous excuse, but it was the best she could come up with on the spur of the moment. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. The drill was perfect, Sarah, he said, his voice laced with amusement. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. Oh, good, she said, feeling her cheeks flush. Well, I just wanted to make sure. See you at lunch. I'm looking forward to it, he said, his voice soft. And then he hung up. Sarah stared at her phone, a silly grin on her face. It was just a brief, awkward phone call, but it was enough. It was confirmation that he was thinking about her too. That this was real. And that lunch couldn't come soon enough. Lunch flew by in a blur of nervous laughter and tentative conversation. Frank was charming and attentive, and Sarah found herself relaxing in his company, her initial anxieties fading away. They talked about everything and nothing, from their favorite books to their childhood pets. As lunch drew to a close, Frank suggested they continue their conversation over dinner. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then agreed. Why not? She was enjoying herself, and she wanted to see where this could lead. Dinner was even better than lunch. They met at a cozy Italian restaurant, the dim lighting and the soft music creating a romantic atmosphere. The awkwardness had dissipated, replaced by a comfortable intimacy. They discovered a shared love of old movies, a passion for hiking, and a surprising interest in birdwatching. Frank told her stories about his time in the army, and Sarah shared her dreams of becoming a full-time artist. They laughed, they listened, they connected. And as the evening wore on, Sarah realized that the age difference didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had, the shared values, the mutual respect and admiration. As Frank walked her to her door, Sarah felt a sense of giddiness she hadn't experienced in years. He leaned in, his eyes searching hers, and gently kissed her goodnight. It was a simple kiss, but it was electric. It was a promise of more to come. As Sarah closed the door, leaning against it, the giddiness started to fade, replaced by a familiar wave of anxiety. The kiss had been wonderful, but now the doubts came flooding back. 31 years. It was a chasm. Could she really build a lasting relationship with someone so much older? What about their future? What about children? And then there was her dad. How would she ever tell him? He was so protective, so set in his ways. He would never understand. He would think she was crazy, irresponsible. She imagined his face, his disappointment, his disapproval. The thought made her stomach churn. She didn't want to hurt him, to disappoint him. He was her best friend, her rock. She walked into the living room, sinking onto the sofa. The phone beckoned from the coffee table. Should she call Lisa? Confide in her, seek her advice. But Lisa would just tell her what she wanted to hear, would encourage her to follow her heart, regardless of the consequences. She needed a more objective perspective. She looked out the window, towards her dad's house next door. The lights were on, casting a warm glow on the lawn. He was probably watching television or reading a book. She thought about walking over there, telling him everything. But the fear held her back. She wasn't ready. Not yet. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. She was caught between two worlds, the excitement of a new love and the comfort of her familiar life. And she didn't know how to reconcile them. The more Sarah thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. Her dad, the age gap, the potential for heartbreak, it was all too much. She couldn't do it. She just couldn't. With a sigh, she made a decision. She would let it go. She would chalk it up to a harmless flirtation, a momentary escape from reality. She would be polite to Frank, friendly even, but she wouldn't pursue anything more. It was the safe choice, the responsible choice. But it was also a little bit sad. A little bit like giving up on a dream. She got up from the sofa and walked over to the window, looking out at the garage. It was dark now, the windows reflecting the moonlight. She thought about going out there, working on her art. She had been feeling inspired lately, thanks to Frank. But the thought of being in that space, surrounded by memories of their brief encounter, was too painful. No, she decided. She would stay inside, watch television, read a book. She would distract herself, forget about Frank, and move on with her life. But as she settled into bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a mistake. That she was letting fear dictate her choices, that she was missing out on something special. She closed her eyes, trying to fall asleep. But the image of Frank's smiling face kept flashing in her mind. And she couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if she had been brave enough to take a chance? What if she had allowed herself to fall in love? Whether she pursued a relationship with Frank or not, the encounter had changed something within her. It had shaken her out of her routine, awakened her senses, and reminded her that she was still capable of feeling desire, excitement, and hope. Even if she didn't find love with Frank, the experience had opened her up to new possibilities. She started to look at her life differently, to question her choices, to consider what she really wanted. She realized that she had been playing it safe for too long, that she had been settling for a life that was comfortable but not fulfilling. She had let fear and doubt dictate her decisions, and she had missed out on opportunities as a result. But now she was determined to change. She started to take more risks, to step outside her comfort zone, to embrace the unknown. She signed up for a pottery class, volunteered at a local animal shelter, and even started to explore online dating. The encounter with Frank had been a catalyst, a spark that had ignited a fire within her. It had reminded her that life was too short to play it safe, that she deserved to be happy, and that she had the power to create the life she wanted. And even though she didn't end up with Frank, she was grateful for the experience. It had been a turning point, a moment of clarity that had set her on a new path. A path filled with possibility, adventure, and the promise of love. A few weeks later, Sarah was in the garage, finally working on her art again. She was sculpting a bird, inspired by the new bird feeder in her dad's yard. She had even started using some of her dad's old tools, finding a new appreciation for their craftsmanship. Her dad popped his head in, a mischievous grin on his face. "Guess who's coming over for dinner tonight?" he asked. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who? Frank, he said, his eyes twinkling. He's been helping me fix up the garden. Says he owes me a few meals for borrowing your drill. Sarah smiled. Oh, she said, trying to sound nonchalant. That's nice. Whether or not anything would happen with Frank in the future, she didn't know. But she was open to the possibility. She was no longer afraid to take a chance, to follow her heart. And even if Frank wasn't the one, she knew that she was ready for something new. She was ready to love again, to be loved, to embrace the adventure that life had to offer. As she looked out at the garden, she saw a young man walking down the street, carrying a bouquet of flowers. He smiled at her and she smiled back. Maybe, just maybe, her new adventure had already begun. The possibilities were endless. And Sarah was finally ready to explore them all. The end.